Hi guys, I want to start this video off by saying first of all that I absolutely love my Steam Deck. I purchased a Steam Deck towards the end of last year and it has reignited my love for PC gaming in a way that honestly nothing else has in the last 5 or 6 years. I went through a period of not really playing PC games an awful lot, and I give full credit to the Steam Deck for bringing me back into the fray of PC gaming when pretty much everything else couldn't do that. I love its accessibility. I love how easy it is to use. Everyone can use it and simply pick up and play it. It's fairly well priced, and overall I think it's a great little machine that plays a vital part of the PC gaming market, and it can introduce people to something that previously they may have thought was off limits to them or too expensive. I think the Steam Deck is fantastic and I hold it in very high regard. I spend most of my evenings on my Steam Deck, and yeah, overall I think it's a very excellent machine and something that I could highly recommend. But let's just say for a moment that you want something, well, more. The Steam Deck's performance is more than adequate for what it is, but there are more powerful versions of very similar hardware available out there. Today I'm going to be talking about the Asus ROG Ally, a few bits and pieces about it. This is the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme Edition, so it's the best edition of the ROG Ally. There are two. The Z1 is, I understand, fairly weak. But today we're going to be talking about the Z1 Extreme Edition with the Radeon 780M integrated graphics card. My initial impressions of the ROG Ally are pretty good. It's got a very decent screen, 1080p screen. It looks very clear and sharp, and the overall design and aesthetic is really nice. There's a lot to like about it. It feels like a premium product. It should be at its price tag. I actually picked mine up used for about £480, but new these are around the sort of £550 to £600 mark. So this is a premium product with a premium price tag. You would expect for it to feel well built, which it does, and also have a really clear, sharp screen. Unlike the Steam Deck, this comes with Windows rather than SteamOS. I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it kind of takes away the accessibility that the Steam Deck has just a little bit. But on the other hand, it opens the ROG Ally up to much more uses than just gaming like this. So you could actually hook it up to a dock and use it as a main PC. After all, it does feature a Ryzen processor in it. This is the Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU. It is pretty mental, actually, how powerful this CPU in this thing is. There is nothing stopping you from buying a dock and using this as your main everyday PC. It's got more than enough grunt to do it, and it's a very snappy, responsive system outside of gaming. Inside of gaming, it's also more than competent. This is GTA 5 at 1080p, 60 FPS, and for 90% of the time, it holds that frame rate very well. So there are a few instances where the frame rate is sort of variable a little bit when there's a lot going on, or when you're flying on an oppressor through the downtown area. But overall, it's a very strong performing machine. With the addition of Windows as well, it also makes it possible for you to use it as your daily PC, which is a massive bonus. Sure, you can install Windows on a Steam Deck, but I kind of think that takes away a little bit from what the purpose of the Steam Deck is. So something with Windows on is both a good and a bad thing, in that it takes away the accessibility a little bit, but then opens up, or it broadens your horizons to being able to use it for much more interesting things. The Asus ROG Ally comes with a 512GB SSD. It also comes with an SD card slot. This is actually an issue. So on the ROG Ally, there appears to be an issue with the SD card slot. A lot of people have speculated that it's down to thermal stress. The SD card slot is placed right next to one of the main fans, and the ROG Ally during use actually can get quite hot. And some people are speculating that it's this heat that is actually killing SD cards and the slot inside the ROG Ally, which essentially for a lot of people makes the SD card slot functionally useless. Now, this comes with 512 gigabytes of fast NVMe storage, but that limits your expansion possibilities massively. They have fixed it, from what I have read on the internet, with an update in the newer models. They've added a copper plate, from what I understand, and also introduced some fan controls to try and alleviate some of the heat that surrounds the SD card slot during heavy operation. Unfortunately, that's not really worked out for me, as the unit I purchased, the SD card slot is essentially not functional. I've tried a number of SD cards, and they all have formatting issues, or you go to format them and it says the drive is much smaller than it actually is, or it simply will not read it. So this is obviously an issue with my specific ROG Ally, but this is not a unique issue. This is, from what I understand, a fairly common issue, certainly more common than it should be. So if you're buying a ROG Ally with the intention of upgrading the storage, then the only real route for you is to actually take it apart and install a larger NVMe drive, or hope that you've got one of the newer models where I'm led to believe that the issue is mostly resolved. So that is a massive negative point, pretty much straight from the off, which kind of takes away from actually how good it is to use this machine. I've been using it for 4 or 5 days now, so please count these as my initial first thoughts rather than an in-depth dive. And I really like it. It's a lot more powerful than the Steam Deck, and that really does translate very well into games. So if you're looking for Steam Deck but meatier, then yeah, this should absolutely fill that role very, very nicely. I also like the quality of the screen. It's a really bright screen. The speakers are fantastic. I absolutely love them. The controls are responsive and a joy to use, and more importantly, it's comfortable in your hands when you're using it in handheld mode, which is a big thing. It's got to be comfortable, otherwise you're not going to be using it for extended periods. Speaking of extended periods, that leads me very briefly into battery life. The battery life on the Asus ROG Ally when the system is in the turbo mode is pretty poor. This isn't a design issue or anything else like this. This is simply a usage thing, unfortunately. So I'll get into it a bit briefly in a moment, but there are a number of modes in the Asus ROG Ally, and they all affect battery life quite significantly. If you're playing AAA games at the highest, the highest power mode, then you're going to have a much shorter battery life. I'll go into that now, actually. So here are the modes available to you: Silent, Performance, and Turbo. Silent is a 10 watt performance mode, which reduces the acoustics of the fans as well as reduces the performance of the hardware inside to sort of keep into that 10 watt envelope. Performance is a standard 15 watt envelope, similar in power consumption to the Steam Deck, where you will get good performance, generally good performance, at the cost of slight noise coming from the machine. Turbo is the I want to run everything sort of mode. It's a 25 watt power mode. It's very hungry, and the fans, if you're actually playing a AAA game in turbo mode, you're really going to notice it because the fans kick up quite significantly. On silent mode, I've had the ROG Ally playing for a couple of hours easy, and the battery still wasn't completely drained. On performance mode, you're probably looking at around an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you're playing something a bit more demanding. On turbo mode, on a demanding game, you could be looking at a little over an hour. I believe that the ROG Ally has a 40 watt hour battery in it, and using 25 watts from the APU, plus the additional wattage that you may not consider, i.e. from the screen, from all the components inside as well, the battery does really sort of go down very quickly in turbo mode. Anyway, guys, let's get on to some games. I know you want to see them. Okay, so first up, as always, is GTA 5. I've actually covered this a little bit, so I will try and keep it a bit shorter. One of the things I will say before we go into all the games, though, is that unlike the Phenom PC the other day, the graphics on this, the actual gameplay, has been recorded using a Razer Ripsaw capture card. So I have captured this gameplay actually directly from the ROG rather than using the ROG itself to record itself. So the numbers you see here are going to be the numbers that you can reasonably expect to achieve on your ROG. Unless otherwise stated, all of these games are running at 1080p low settings, or in the case of GTA 5 here, it's 1080p normal settings with sliders around halfway. And yeah, overall, as I said before, it's a fairly smooth experience with the frame rate dipping a little bit in some circumstances, especially where it involves the Presser Mark II in the downtown area. I see the frame rate dip to the sort of mid 40s. Overall, this performs considerably better than the Steam Deck does on this game. The Steam Deck does run at 1080p if you turn all the settings down, but the frame rate is quite variable, and I would recommend on the Steam Deck at the very least that you cap it to 30 to get a consistent experience, whereas there was no real issue with that here. You know, it ran really well 90% of the time, and the few times where the frame rate did drop into the 40s, it wasn't serious enough for it to be a game breaker. It was merely a lot more load than you would normally see on GTA, so it was the exception rather than the norm. So it's easy to recommend this one at the very least, quite easily actually. Anyway, let's move on to the next game. Okay, so next up is Helldivers II. This was recorded at 1600 by 900 resolution with no frame scaling. The graphics settings were set to low. And yeah, it's a playable experience. It's one of those games that looks pretty good regardless of what graphical settings you have it. So I don't really think there's an awful lot of difference between low and medium. It was a more than playable experience. The frame rate was capped here at 30 FPS as I wanted a more consistent experience rather than higher frames. There were a few occasions where that frame rate did drop down into the mid-20s. It is noticeable on a game like Helldivers. 30 FPS, it already feels a little sluggish for a game like this, and the lower drops into the mid-20s were definitely felt as the frame rate already started off fairly low. Overall though, it still looks great, and it still plays well enough that if this is the only way that you can actually play Helldivers, it's more than adequate enough. I would maybe suggest lowering the resolution a little bit more to get more consistent frames if the frame rate is of importance to you. If the frame rate is not of importance to you, then 1600 by 900 at low settings with no upscaling or anything else like that will be more than enough. You will achieve 30 FPS 85-90% of the time, and it is more than playable, if not perfect, at that resolution and that frame rate. So yeah, Helldivers 2 I would say is playable with some slight caveats. Let's move on to the next game. Okay, so this is quite a surprising one. This is The Division 2 at 1080p on low settings with no frame scaling or anything else like that, and it was genuinely quite surprising how well this played on this hardware. I've been playing it on and off since I actually got my ROG Ally on the machine itself, and I've had no real issues playing it. This is more than playable enough. The frame rate itself does tend to stick into the sort of 50s to 60 most of the time. There are some circumstances where that frame rate again can be brought into the sort of late 30s, early 40s on occasion. It doesn't hang there long, but obviously going from 60 FPS to 38 FPS, unless you're using FreeSync or anything else like that, you will notice the change in frame rate quite significantly. Overall though, this was more than playable. On the Steam Deck, the settings had to be very low to get something that you could consider achievable. So this is a massive upgrade from the Steam Deck as a whole, and overall it's a generally good performer. It plays well, and it's easy to recommend for anyone who was thinking of getting this and owns a ROG Ally. So here's another AAA game. These are serious games that I'm testing on this hardware. Another AAA game that works absolutely fine. Dead Space 2023 is next. I had a number of issues with this, which I'll cover very briefly. My capture card really did not want to capture this at 720p settings, and I had no end of issues trying to adjust the contrast and everything else like that on this game. I understand it's a dark game, but I had some technical issues actually trying to capture this game. However, as for the game itself, it's okay in performance. I have this playing at 720p low settings, but 1600 by 900 also generated similar results, and 1920 by 1080 also generated perhaps playable results. One of the things that I tried to do with this game is, with the game stuttered pretty consistently on the ROG Ally. As you can see here, I did try and limit the frame rate to 30 FPS using the Armory Crate Command Center, the software that the ROG Ally comes with. However, it would not do it at all. It would not cap the frame rate no matter what I did. There were no options in AMD Adrenalin either where I could see an option to cap it. I think that this game would actually be perfectly playable if you could cap the frame rate to 30 FPS. One of the main issues that I had with this game is that the frame rate was all over the place and it was constant. It wasn't just a sort of every now and again thing like Helldivers is. This game was consistently stuttering to the point where it was, at least for me, borderline unplayable, as the frame rate was all over the place. If I can find a way to cap this to 30 FPS, I will definitely revisit this one. I want to say it's playable. I guess it is if you can cap it. If not, I think that, at least for me personally, the stutters in the frame rate are unfortunately an absolute deal breaker. And while the game looks good even on low at 720p, it's hard to recommend due to the stuttering issues that I was coming across here. This was installed to the internal drive on the ROG Ally as well, so it's not like it was installed to something that wasn't fast enough. So yeah, that's the real sort of first slight disappointment that I came across on the ROG Ally. Next up is Dying Light 2. This was at 1080p with FSR enabled for this. This is similar to Dead Space in some regards. I feel that being able to cap the frame rate to 30 would result in a more than playable experience. I would also think that dropping the resolution might help a little bit, but this feels more like something where the frame rate being capped rather than the resolution being lowered would actually help. The game ran okay enough, but like Dead Space, it suffered from a number of stuttering issues that, at least for me personally, were deal breakers again. With no option to cap the frame rate in the graphical settings I could see, and also with the Armory Crate, despite the fact that it was being set at 30 FPS, not engaging a 30 FPS lock on that. It's one of those games that, at least for me, was unplayable with an unlocked frame rate. Once again, like Dead Space, I'm going to have a look, see if there's something I can do about this to cap the frame rate, and maybe revisit this again in another video, as it feels like it can be playable. You can see me here again trying to adjust the frame rate cap with no success, but it feels like it can be playable, but that stuttering is often enough that it kind of ruins the experience for me at the very least. So we'll revisit this one alongside Dead Space in a future video. Left 4 Dead 2 is next. This was at 1080p with a 60 FPS cap and all settings set to maximum, with the exception of anti-aliasing, which was set to 2 times. It was more than playable enough. It's not a demanding game to run. It is still a very popular game though, which is why it's on here. But aside from my awful shooting, it was more than playable enough and quite easy to recommend on the ROG Ally. But then again, Left 4 Dead 2, generally speaking, runs pretty well on everything, including the recently tested AMD Phenom. So if it can run on that, then it runs on this absolutely fine. Highly recommended that you play it, and if you play it on a ROG Ally, then you're in for a good time. And finally, Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I tested this on the Phenom in my last video, and I'm testing it here again. This is at 1080p with the settings that the game chooses, and overall it was a good experience. There was once again issues planet side, which resulted in the frame rate dropping, but when you actually weren't in the Mako or planet side, you were in like Sitsta and places like that, the frame rate barely budged from 60 FPS. I'm starting to come to the conclusion that there is something specifically about sort of planet texture generation maybe that causes an issue on Mass Effect, as this is now the second machine that has had difficulty planet side, second sort of lower power machine that has had difficulty sort of keeping up with the textures and things like that. So maybe this is something to do with a game engine thing rather than a hardware thing. Overall, though, it was once again more than playable, and you could quite easily play this from start to finish with no real issue. Overall, my initial impressions of the ROG Ally are pretty good, with some caveats that I've mentioned before. I'm not particularly pleased about the SD card issue and feel that it would limit your expansion options massively. Not everyone wants to have to open up this thing to install a larger NVMe drive, and with the price of NVMe drives as well, the SD card slot would have been an easy to access, easier and cheaper option to be able to go with. So the fact that there's some sort of issue going on with the SD card slot in a lot of Allies is really a massive negative point. If you have a dock and you place it on the dock, you can install external drives to it. So I've installed an external drive on this dock and it performs absolutely fine. The issue there, of course, is that it simply then doesn't become portable, which again kind of takes away a little bit actually from the whole idea of the machine. So it's difficult to really see past the card slot issue actually. It's been a massive limiter on what I've been able to do with the machine portable without upgrading the NVMe drive in it. The battery life, it's okay, but the battery life I wish was better. I understand that there has to be some sort of limitation on what we can do with putting batteries in these things and still keeping them usable and relatively lightweight. So there's got to be some sort of limitation there. But the turbo mode on the ROG Ally, it can go through the battery real quick, which is another minus point. Armory Crate not locking frame rates as you ask it to is a less serious point. But again, one I'm not particularly pleased about. As for the positives, though, I have a lot to say for it positive too. I actually personally love the fact that there's Windows on it and that I could use it as a PC if ever the need arises. I also love the quality of the screen. It's very sharp, very bright. The quality of the speakers are absolutely outstanding. It plays games fantastically, much better than the Steam Deck does. I appreciate that we're not in the same price bracket. However, if you want the best of the best, then this is really where you should be going. So I absolutely love the performance capability of the machine. I like the fact that it has quite a fast processor in it as well for the non-gaming related tasks. The fact that I could take all of my videos that I'm using in this video today, so all of the gameplay from Dead Space and GTA, and I could simply put it on the ROG Ally and then use my video editor to then edit it is pretty insane. The controls are solid and well made. It feels comfortable in your hand for extended play. Overall, it's a really nice looking, aesthetically pleasing device that it looks premium and feels premium. So there is also a lot I like about the ROG Ally as well. There are just a couple of issues that one of them certainly I wish was addressed, as it would make what's going to be a future data upgrade much cheaper. But there are enough caveats that I would say if all you're looking for is gaming on the go, then I could easily recommend the Steam Deck all day, every day. If you're looking for gaming on the go with sort of top-end performance, then I could recommend the ROG Ally, with caveats being the issues that I've mentioned in this video. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. These are just my initial thoughts. I will probably be revisiting the ROG Ally in the near future. You will certainly see more gameplay from it. And until next time, guys, take care.